Hi everyone, I'm Reverend Jim Keat. This is the whole Bible. We are up to Genesis chapters 10 and 11. This is the series where we go through the entire Bible from beginning to end. We are making our way through Genesis. We've done a few videos so far, so if you missed those, go catch up. But we're diving into chapters 10 and 11. In that one, you could call it tribes and nations. That's a good catch-all phrase for these two chapters. Now, one of the chapters, chapter 11, you've probably heard before, but chapter 10, that's the one that you might have skipped over. So these two chapters, Genesis 10 and 11, they form a literary and theological bridge between the flood narratives we just had with Noah and what's coming next with the call of Abraham. It's also worth pointing out, Genesis myth, legend. The first 10 chapters are myth, the rest of it is legend. So we are now into the legend part of Genesis. This is not history. I hate to break it to you. None of the Bible is our modern understanding of history, and this ancient text of Genesis is definitely not a historical text. That's not the point. It's an origin story. It's a mythic, legendary telling of how a group of people became the people they became. Now, these two chapters, Genesis 10, the first one, it is often called the Table of Nations. It's a genealogical map that portrays humanity's spread across the earth through the descendants of Noah's sons. So you're going to get, I should know this. What are the three names? Ham, Shem, and Japheth. I was going to say Japheth, but that didn't sound right, but that's right. Ham, Shem, and Japheth. So this gives us the descendants of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and expresses an ancient Israelite worldview in which all people share a common origin, suggesting kinship rather than separation. Also interesting to note, whereas, last week we talked about the flood as these waters of unmaking, the Noah flood story as a new creation story. Well, here's kind of another Adam and Eve, origin of people story through Noah this time. So just interesting connections to make for us all. Now, Genesis 11 is a contrast, where Genesis 10 is all these nations came from this starting point. Genesis 11 narrates the story of the Tower of Babel, a parable-like episode about human ambition, pride, and the fragmentation of language and culture. So if Genesis 10 is we're all in this together, Genesis 11 is Now together, these two chapters reflect the tension between unity and diversity, ambition and humility, empire and community. These chapters can be read as a critique of domination and the misuse of power. Chapter 10's genealogy becomes a celebration of human diversity as a divine blessing. Look at all these different people, a reminder that difference is not a curse, but part of God's creative design. But then Genesis 11 can be read as a liberation story, where God disrupts an emerging empire that seeks to centralize power, control, and identity in one place. Does that sound familiar? There's even a line there in chapter 11 says, "Let us make a name for ourselves." Rather than punishing humanity, the scattering of peoples and the diversification of language becomes the act of divine liberation, freeing humanity from uniformity and the tyranny of empire. Oh, isn't that so good? Now, these chapters invite readers to see diversity, decentralization, and cultural multiplicity as reflections of God's judgment and creative intent. All that from two chapters that you probably skimmed right by or just thought was about a big, tall building. Okay, let's take a slightly closer look at these two chapters if we were to give them some titles. Let's do that, just because it's fun. Chapter 10, you could call it Diversity and Descent. This is that Table of Nations. It traces the spread of Noah's descendants. It presents a vision of humanity as a vast, interconnected family. And this genealogy celebrates the richness of cultural diversity while understanding shared origins and interdependence. That's chapter 10. Chapter 11, Ambition and Liberation. Humanity's attempt to build a tower to make a name for themselves becomes this cautionary tale about pride and the drive for centralized power. God scatters the people and multiplication of language, not as a punishment, but like I said, liberation, a divine act ensuring that no single culture or empire holds dominion over others. Oh, you should probably rewind and listen to that sentence again. Liberation, a divine act ensuring that no single culture or empire holds dominion over others. I also want to point out that we'll pick up the Tower of Babel story a long time from now when we get to the book of Acts, because the Pentecost story in Acts chapter 2 is kind of Babel reversed, where they start with a language and then they can't understand each other. The Pentecost story in Acts chapter 2 is kind of the opposite of that, where suddenly all these different languages can be understood. More on that in, a long time because we got a lot of Bible till we get to the book of Acts. Okay, so that's Genesis 10 and 11. This is only 2 chapters, so a little bit quicker video. And now we're going to watch 2 quick videos. We're going to hear Reverend Mira Swalani talk about chapter 10, and then we're going to hear Reverend Amanda Meisenheimer talk about chapter 11. And then I'll have some questions. So here we go.
Bible in a minute, Genesis chapter 10. Now, I know this is another genealogy, but don't skip this one. Typically, genealogies list the fathers and sons of each generation, but this one's a little bit different. This one names the sons of Noah, and then it goes on to say where each of their families and their descendants end up geographically. What this chapter does is it lists the names of tribes and nations and where they are located to show that they all eventually trace back to Noah's lineage. Now, this is pretty cool as a modern day reader. You see, as a people today, we all have our own families. We're all so different. We have different languages and cultures and traditions. We all belong to different lands, different countries, and different nations. And yet, somehow, we are all interconnected. We are all related to one another. What this chapter shows is that we are all children of our Creator God.
Bible in a minute, Genesis chapter 11. Now the whole world has one language and few words. And the people wander around a little bit. Then they stop and they say, let's build a city and a tower that reaches the heavens so that we will have a name for ourselves and so that we won't be scattered across the face of the earth. The Lord comes down to inspect this city and tower and says, they are one people with one language. This is just the beginning of what they could accomplish. Let us confuse their languages. That's why they call it Babel. They were scattered across the face of the earth. The chapter goes on to describe the descendants of Shem, son of Noah, all the way to Abram, showing that God rejects the power of the tower and instead chooses the power of the covenant.
Okay, so what stands out to you? That's always kind of the framing question for all of this as you think about these 2 chapters in maybe some new perspectives. What do you notice? Notice what you notice. And then here's a few specific questions. You can leave a comment in the place where comments go, or just ponder these things in your heart. What does it mean to view this genealogy not as dry history, but as a theological claim about shared humanity? What kind of tower building do we see in our world today? Efforts to centralize power, control, or identity? I know you got some answers to that one. How might the confusion of languages be understood as a gift that protects diversity and decentralizes oppression? All right, I'm making you think with these questions. I told you. So drop them in the comment spot. And the next video, next week, we are diving into Abraham Part 1, Genesis 12 through 15. So come back for more. Go back and revisit all the ones from last week. And I'll see you on the next one. See you later.